And I was simply questioning how we have ships running out of fuel in the open seas and planes being grounded. And
I didn't say ships were running out of fuel in open seas or planes were grounded. I'm saying we have to make trade-offs.
And maintenance accounts are running
everything
out
our
of money.
troops need on the battlefield, they're getting in spades and beyond. It's ultimately looking into the future. Can we invest above and beyond that, the types of munitions fast enough as we upgrade and modernize our force? That's what's at issue here in this $1.5 trillion, this supplemental and any other additional funding that comes.
Senator Chris Coons just told Pete Hegseth to his face that the Iran war strategy has no credible likelihood of success. He starts by naming everything he agrees with: honoring the fallen, protecting the troops, keeping Iran from a nuclear weapon. Then the disagreement. 143 days into a war of choice that America started without consulting NATO allies, regional partners, Congress, or the American people. Coons calls that the first strategic mistake. Because a war the public wasn't sold on is a war the public won't sustain when the costs climb. And the costs have climbed. Closed straight. Cheap Iranian drones hitting US bases, higher fuel and fertilizer prices, and rising American casualties. All of it, Coons says, entirely foreseeable. Watch this. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button if you want to join the community that we're building on this channel. It goes a long way, really means a lot to me.
That we should stop and remember them and console and comfort their families. That we should be mindful of the hundreds of Americans who've been wounded and injured in this war in Iran. General Kane, your observations about how our adversaries are aligning more and more closely. Technology is accelerating, and cheap and lethal and easily accessible drones pose greater and greater risks to our troops, our homeland, and our security. And Secretary Hegseth, that we need to protect our troops wherever our president directs them, that we need to protect our partners and allies, and that the dangerous radical Iranian regime should never possess a nuclear weapon. I think we agree on all of these core basic points. Where I think we may disagree is on this supplemental and on the strategic choices made to achieve some of these core goals. We're 143 days into a war with Iran, a war of choice that we started with Israel, but did not include, consult, or incorporate our core allies, our NATO allies, our regional allies, the American people, and Congress. And the reason to consult and include our allies and Congress and the American people is so that when the costs and the length of a war extend beyond what we'd initially imagined, the American people and their representatives in Congress understand that sacrifice and can continue to support it. I think your first strategic mistake was to not consult the American people in Congress and make a clear case for the reasons behind this war. There have been many, lots offered. And I think our military has executed on the core missions: attack ballistic missile sites, sink the Blue Water Navy, attack their proxies, constrain their capacity. But I frankly think it was entirely foreseeable that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz, would use cheap, lethal, widely available Shahed drones that they've led the world in manufacturing to attack our bases, our troops, our partners and allies, and impose real costs. Higher costs in fertilizer, in fuel, higher costs for the world, and tragically, increasingly higher human costs for us and for our troops. So, two questions, two general lines of questioning, if I could. Mr. Secretary, your question says, without these supplemental funds, we will face critical shortfalls that threaten our ability to pay our service members and sustain global operations without disruption. You've been asked repeatedly, there's $75 billion appropriated but unobligated. Can we really not avoid critical short-term shortfalls? What does that mean about the budget management within the department in terms of unexpected and unbudgeted wars? First, Operation Southern Spear, and then Operation Epic Fury.
I would just note, I was sort of updated, 95% of that One Big Beautiful Bill funding will be allocated by the end of September in accordance with congressional intent. So these are things we said we would spend, and we told you we would spend them on, and we plan to spend them on those things by the end of September. So this is a new request based on new realities of a world we face, stepping up to meet that moment.
And forgive me, Mr. Secretary, but that's news to me, that $75 billion will be out the door allocated and spent by September. And I was simply questioning how we have ships running out of fuel in the open seas and planes being grounded. And
I didn't say ships were running out of fuel in open seas or planes were grounded. I'm saying we have to make trade-offs.
Maintenance accounts are running
everything
out
our
of
troops need on the battlefield, they're getting in spades and beyond. It's ultimately looking into the future. Can we invest above and beyond that, the types of munitions, fast enough as we upgrade and modernize our force? That's what's at issue here in this $1.5 trillion, this supplemental and any other additional funding that comes.
Two quite different things, a $1.5 trillion base budget request and a now $76 billion supplemental. And I was simply going to point to Department of Homeland Security is sitting on nearly $100 billion in unobligated funds. You haven't requested reimbursement for the millions of, frankly, billions of dollars the department has spent on law enforcement. Second,
we requested reimbursement and are getting a substantial reimbursement from DHS.
That's good news, and that's news to me. And frankly, as we reflect on the service and sacrifice of those who put their lives on the line of this war, one of the things I've raised over and over and over is the ways in which this administration has dragged its feet on partnering with Ukraine in order to deploy the best-in-class sensors, detectors, and counter-drone systems to protect everything from Dover Air Force Base to our bases in the region, to our troops, to our partners. I want to see you focus on accelerating the defense of our troops and our nation, focus on accelerating the defense of our troops and this region, and a strategy that has a real chance at succeeding at the goals that we agree on, because the strategy followed, I think, has no credible likelihood of success.
Thank you all for being here today. Secretary Hegseth, the American people either didn't want this war from the start or were deeply skeptical of this war because they have seen this country make the same mistake over and over again in wars in the Middle East, and that is to create either unrealistic or open-ended objectives. You said in March that the United States was, quote, on plan to defeat, destroy, and disable all of Iran's meaningful military capabilities at a pace that the world has never seen before. Obviously, as we've discussed here today, that objective has not been achieved and is not going to be achieved. Iran is more adept than even at the start of the war at hiding their capabilities or repairing after damage we have done. There's an open report that when it comes to their missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz, 30 of 33 are still operational.
I wouldn't believe all the open reports, Senator.
But I've also heard you say in this hearing that the objectives now seem to be more limited than they were at the outset of the war, that this is about reopening the strait and this is about dismantling their nuclear capability. And the president, of course, has said himself that he thinks Iran has a right to a missile program. So my question is pretty simple. Is it correct that it is no longer a war objective to destroy all of their military capacities? This is what the president has said. Have our goals been simplified to reopening the strait and to getting into a negotiation over a nuclear program? Now, I don't think you have a realistic plan to do either of those things, but I think it's important for us to know what we're funding. Are the objectives much more limited today than they were when you made that statement in March?
So I think the objectives have been consistent and clear from the beginning. And I would contrast it to North Korea, where a conventional buildup was used to hide a nuclear capability that eventually evolved to a point where it couldn't be contested. And what Iran continued to do, even after Midnight Hammer, was try to build that conventional capability to dare anyone to stop them from pursuing nuclear weapons. So getting after their conventional capabilities, missile launchers, defense industrial base, their Navy, was all part of it, ensuring they can't blackmail us into pursuing a nuclear capability. And laser focused on Iran will never have a nuclear capability. That's the promise the president has made and that he will keep in every way.
I think it's important. It is still a war objective, either through military action or through a diplomatic agreement, to destroy and disable all of Iran's meaningful military capacities, including their missile program.
As far as all, when we talked about that from the podium at the outset of this, we were talking about their defense industrial base. And if you look at the metrics of their ability to make more, that it's been overwhelmingly destroyed. Not everything, but overwhelmingly. Now, do they have missiles in underground bunkers because they're a terror state? Sure they do, and we've acknowledged that from the beginning.
Yeah,
but their capacity is less today than it's ever been.
They obviously have significant capacity to effectively disrupt the entirety of the Middle East and oil flows out of the Middle East, and that's not going to change. Let me ask you one more question. This is a request for supplemental funding because you don't have the funding in your base budget to do what you need to do, which makes questions about the base budget relevant. There's been a lot of attention, Mr. Secretary, on the modernization of a luxury jet that was gifted to the president by the government of Qatar. Reports suggest that maybe as much as $1 billion in your base funding, an extraordinary amount of money, has been used for an upgrade, and the plane is back in the shop for a second upgrade. As far as I can tell, never before has an administration not made public the amount of money for an upgrade or a construction contract on a presidential airplane. Obviously, we don't need or want disclose the details of that upgrade, but never before have you withheld from Congress and the public the total amount of money. I think there are two really important questions here. One, will you make public the amount of money that you are spending to upgrade this plane? And two, can you commit to this Congress and this committee that the president isn't going to take this plane with him when he leaves office? The only thing more insulting to the taxpayers of spending money on a jet they don't need would be for the president to take it with him, to take it out of our military inventory when he leaves office.
See, the Air Force has done an incredible job making that a capable jet. That ultimately, but its capabilities and investment are classified and shouldn't be talked about in
That's
public
not what
setting,
I'm asking.
considering the security of the President of the United States.
Will you disclose the amount of money publicly?
I would imagine as part of the regular budget process, that's something that we would look at.
Let's be absolutely clear about what Chris Coons established in this hearing, coming from one of the Senate's most measured and bipartisan members, a senior defense appropriator, who begins by affirming the mission. His conclusion lands with unusual force. The strategy this administration has followed in the Iran war has no credible likelihood of success, and he built that case methodically through the war's foreseeable costs and the department's evasive answers about money. He opens by establishing that common ground deliberately. We agree, he says, that we should honor the fallen and comfort their families, that we should be mindful of the hundreds wounded in this war, that cheap and lethal drones pose growing dangers, that we must protect our troops and allies, and that Iran's dangerous regime must never possess a nuclear weapon. All of it stipulated. The disagreement, he says, is about the supplemental funding request and the strategic choices made to pursue those shared goals. Then he lays out the core strategic failure. The country is 143 days into a war of choice. One America started alongside Israel without consulting or incorporating its NATO allies, its regional allies, Congress, or the American people. And Coons explains precisely why that matters in a way that isn't just process complaint. You consult allies and Congress and the public, he says, so that when a war's costs and length stretch beyond what anyone first imagined, the people and their representatives understand the sacrifice and can continue to support it. Skip that step, and public support collapses the moment the war gets hard. That, Coons argues, was the first strategic mistake, launching a war without making the case for it. And then he catalogues the foreseeable consequences. Yes, the military executed its core missions, striking ballistic missile sites, sinking Iran's blue water navy, hitting proxies, but it was entirely foreseeable. Coons argues that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz, that it would use the cheap, lethal Shahid drones it leads the world in manufacturing to attack American bases and troops and allies, and that the result would be higher costs in fuel and fertilizer for the world, and rising human costs for American troops. None of this was a surprise. It was predictable, and it was predicted. Then Coons turns to the money, and this is where Hegseth's answers get slippery. Max Hegseth's written justification warns that without the supplemental, the department faces critical shortfalls, threatening its ability to pay service members and sustain operations. But Coons points to the $75 billion already appropriated and unobligated, and asks the obvious question: can the department really not avoid short-term shortfalls with $75 billion sitting unspent? What does that say about budget management when unbudgeted wars, first Operation Southern Spear, then Operation Epic Fury, keep materializing? Hegseth's response is revealing. He claims 95% of that funding will be allocated by the end of September, in line with congressional intent, which, as Coons notes, is actually news to him and undercuts the department's own shortfall. If the money is going out the door on schedule, where's the crisis? Coons presses the distinction that matters. There's a $1.5 trillion base budget request and a separate $76 billion supplemental, and the department keeps blurring them. When Coons probes the shortfall claim, Hegseth retreats to hypotheticals about future munitions investment, conceding in effect that troops aren't actually going unpaid and ships aren't actually running out of fuel. The catastrophic language was doing rhetorical work. The facts didn't support. Coons even does the department's homework for it, noting that Homeland Security is sitting on nearly $100 billion in unobligated funds, and that defense hadn't sought reimbursement for the billions it has spent supporting domestic law enforcement. Hegseth claims they are now getting a substantial reimbursement from DHS, which again is news to Coons. The pattern across the exchanges is a senator who has done the budget math being repeatedly told about money movements the department never disclosed. But Coons saves his sharpest point for the troops themselves he has raised over and over the way. This administration has dragged its feet on partnering with Ukraine to deploy best-in-class sensors, detectors, and counter-drone systems, the very technology that could protect everything from Dover Air Force Base to bases in the region to troops in the field against exactly the cheap drones Iran is using to kill Americans. Ukraine has become the world leader in counter-drone warfare through hard experience, and the administration won't move fast enough to bring that capability to the fight. Coons wants the focus on accelerating the defense of American troops and a strategy with a real chance of achieving the goals everyone shares. Because the strategy actually followed, he concludes, has no credible likelihood of success. That is the verdict. And it matters because of who delivered it, not an opponent of the mission, but one of its supporters, a bipartisan appropriator who affirmed every shared goal, then walked through the foreseeable costs, the evasive budget answers, and the failure to protect troops with available technology, and concluded that the plan cannot get there from here when your allies in the Senate are telling you the strategy can't work. The problem isn't politics, it's the strategy. You are watching David Brooke, and if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button. You can leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around at the end, and drop a blue heart in the comments, and until next time, I'll see you soon.